things you don't fuck with, my money on my family. I don't play that shit, I flip and go schizo. All this rapping bullshit will go straight out the window. And I'm very plugged in these streets for your info. From New York to LA and everywhere in the middle. So check, made up and set up the stage while we celebrate like it's Thanksgiving every day. But anyway, pass the turkey, mashed potatoes, and the gravy too. I'm here to eat, I wish I was here to play with you. I'm chilling at the finish line with my feet up, and of course we thank God every time before we eat.
In the region south of Chicago, everything feels a little bigger than life. The bridges and boats and buildings, the movers and shakers, even people's dreams. In this program, you'll see how famous industrialists shaped Chicago's south suburbs in northwest Indiana. There's the largest steel mill in the Western Hemisphere, one of the world's first airports, and a quarry like a man-made canyon 40 stories deep. You'll see radical experiments in town planning, like Park Forest, and surprising architectural gems by Frank Lloyd Wright and others in places like Blue Island and Chicago Heights. You'll find some of Chicago's most beautiful suburbs: Homewood, Flossmoor, Olympia Fields, and more. Astonishingly, this region has one of the most diverse natural environments in the country, despite a century of industrial development. It's an area rich in African American history, from the Underground Railroad to pioneering aviators, entrepreneurs, athletes, and entertainers. You'll meet the villainous, the virtuous, and some of the most outrageous people America has ever seen. I'm Jeffrey Baer. Ride along with me on the railways, highways, and waterways south of Chicago. Our tour starts in Gary. From there, we follow the Lake Michigan shoreline west and north to Chicago's Calumet Harbor, where we board a tugboat and cruise the Calumet River to Blue Island. Then we hop aboard a Model A Ford and head south on the old Dixie Highway, visiting suburbs on and near the historic route until we reach the town of Crete. Finally, we double back, ending our tour in America's prototype post-World War II planned community, Park Forest. Here's what you probably know about Gary, Indiana. It's seen better days. It's struggling with urban blight and crime and unemployment. And here's what you might think is the reason: the collapse of the steel industry in a one-industry town. But this is what you probably don't know about Gary. U.S. Steel is still going strong here. Gary Works is still the biggest steel mill in the Western Hemisphere and has almost certainly produced more steel over its lifetime than any plant on Earth. This part of the plant, called the strip mill, is the most productive of its kind in the world. Here, red-hot slabs of steel are rolled into ribbons up to 1.5 miles long. The end product is used to make car bodies, washers, dryers, and other appliances. The steel industry didn't collapse here, but stiff foreign competition and other financial pressures forced it to change, in fact, to revolutionize the way it works. Today, it takes just 23 workers to operate the strip mill. Overall, this plant is about as productive today with 7,000 employees as it once was with nearly 30,000. Other mills in the area went through similar modernizations. The ones that didn't closed down. But the city of Gary was built at the height of the industrial age to serve a very different kind of steel industry. And today, the city is struggling to adapt to a huge reduction in workforce and a dramatic decline in population. The story of Gary's rise and sudden fall, and now its hoped-for rebirth, is like a great American novel. At the turn of the 20th century, the future site of Gary was a nearly uninhabited place called Etna. Although it wasn't far from Chicago, it was so desolate that its main business was a dynamite factory. Chicago-based silent movie studios used the area to film desert scenes. It was just the kind of place Judge Elbert H. Gary was looking for to build the world's largest steel mill. Elbert Gary was a former mayor of Wheaton, Illinois, and a DuPage County judge. His Pittsburgh-based company, U.S. Steel, was the largest business enterprise the world had ever seen. But as large as it was, it couldn't meet the demand for steel at the start of the 20th century. The answer to Gary's problem was the sandy shore at the southern tip of Lake Michigan, halfway between the northern ore mines and the southern coal fields, and a stone's throw away from Chicago. Construction began in 1906 with teams of horses leveling the dunes. The mill opened in February 1909. It drew immigrant workers from around the world and African Americans from the Deep South. In his attitude toward his workers, Elbert Gary had something of a split personality. On the one hand, his company paid high wages, more than $6 a day, offered stock ownership, and invented the slogan, "Safety First." On the other hand, his laborers worked 12-hour days, 6 and 7 days a week, with a 24-hour swing shift every 2 weeks. And Gary would have nothing to do with unions. Finally, after a bitter strike in 1919 and then a personal appeal from President Harding in 1923, U.S. Steel instituted an 8-hour day in the mills. But the plant wasn't unionized until 1937, 10 years after Elbert Gary died. Most U.S. Steel workers lived in the city built by the Gary Land Company, a subsidiary of U.S. Steel, and named for the company's chairman. This is the Gary Land Company's very first building. It was restored and landmarked in the 1980s, and it's now part of the Gary Historical and Cultural Society. Gary is America's largest city, founded in the 20th century. It rose from nothing to a population of more than 55,000 in little more than a decade. People called it the Magic City and the City of the Century. And like its namesake, it had a split personality. Executives, foremen, and skilled workers lived in what was called the first subdivision of Gary. It was a pristine neighborhood with paved streets, lovely homes, and a bustling business district. But most plant laborers lived farther south in a shantytown called the Patch. It had no paved streets or running water or sewers, but it had plenty of saloons, including one called the Bucket of Blood. Gambling and prostitution flourished there. As the steel industry grew and prospered, so did Gary. Broadway, the main drag that ran directly to the plant gate, was lined with stores, banks, theaters, and restaurants. The domed City Hall and County Courthouse stand as reminders of Gary's glory days. The original designs for the buildings were part of a grand gateway to Gary by the famous Prairie-style architect George W. Mayer. But Mayer, who suffered from depression, committed suicide in 1926 before construction started. His son Philip redesigned the City Hall in neoclassical style. The Lake County Superior Court building right across the street is its near twin, designed by a local architect. The Northwest Indiana Water Company's 150-foot tall tower has been a local landmark since it was built in 1910. Many of the prairie-style homes in the first subdivision were designed by Chicago architects George and Arthur Dean for the Gary Land Company. They used mass production techniques to make amenities like fireplaces and built-in bookcases affordable to working-class homebuyers, according to architectural historian Christopher Meyer. Today, many of them have been abandoned or torn down. Frank Lloyd Wright was another architect who dreamed of bringing great design to the masses. Wright's ambitious plan for American system-built houses involved the use of interchangeable prefabricated elements, but only a few dozen were ever built. This one, built in 1916 for insurance executive Wilbur Winan, has been vacant since the 1970s. The house has gone through several owners in the last few years, according to Meyer. The current owner has done some restoration work since these pictures were taken in the fall of 2003. This house, from the office of Frank Lloyd Wright, is lovingly maintained by its private owners. It was built in 1909 for building contractor Ingwald Moe. Even Thomas Edison had a concept for affordable housing that was tried in Gary, the concrete house. Edison promoted the houses as maintenance-free, indestructible, and low-priced. But the equipment needed to build the homes turned out to be too expensive, and the concept never really took off. This once abandoned row of concrete houses in Gary's Horace Mann Ambridge neighborhood was refurbished in the 1990s and sold to low-income home buyers. One owner reports her only complaint is that hanging pictures requires special heavy-duty nails. The schools were as revolutionary as the town and the mill, but Superintendent William Wirt's experiment in progressive education was short-lived. Wirt was a radical reformer who'd grown disillusioned with traditional public education. He built huge schools and put all grades from kindergarten through junior college under one roof. His schools stayed open 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, year-round. They were surrounded by huge parks and playgrounds and had every conceivable facility. Students attended school for 8 hours a day, rotating through equal periods of work, study, and play, so that every part of the building was in use at all times. Gary schools became a model for school systems all around the country. But the Gary Plan caused a riot in New York City when a progressive mayor implemented it there in 1917. The opposition mayoral candidate convinced immigrant parents it was just a scheme to turn out cheap labor for large corporations, and they took to the streets. Later, an independent study discredited many elements of the plan, and by the 1930s, the Gary schools adopted a more conventional system. Gary's first Wirt school, Emerson, is still standing. Today, it's a magnet school specializing in visual and performing arts. Another of Gary's surviving architectural gems is this bathing pavilion at Marquette Park Beach, completed in 1921. It's the work of the same architects who designed the City Hall complex we saw earlier, George W. Mayer and Son. It mixes neoclassical and prairie influences. The building now houses an aviation museum honoring the famous African-American Tuskegee Airmen who fought in World War II. It also honors Octave Chanute, who experimented with gliders on the dunes here and helped the Wright brothers create their first successful airplane. Mayer and Son also designed the nearby recreation pavilion at Marquette Park, completed in 1924. Here they used Italian Renaissance and prairie elements. This picturesque lagoon in Marquette Park used to be where the Grand Calumet River flowed into Lake Michigan, but a canal created way over in Illinois in the 1800s actually reversed the flow of the Calumet River, and the former river mouth filled in with sand, creating this lagoon. As we'll see, almost all of the waterways and much of the landscape in this area have been altered over the centuries by industry. But some business interests saw northern Indiana's natural beauty as an asset. The South Shoreline Railroad promoted the region to its Chicago passengers as a resort area. And the railroad donated land and loaned money to help create Indiana Dunes State Park, east of Gary in Chesterton. The South Shoreline is the nation's last surviving interurban. The interurbans were trolleys that took people from town to town in the days before intercity highways. Other areas of the dunes were saved by a local grassroots organization with the help of Senator Paul Douglas. They convinced the federal government to create the Indiana Dunes National Lakeshore in 1966. It extends east from Gary all the way to Michigan City. In 1967, Democrat Richard Hatcher took on Gary's powerful Democratic political machine in a bid to become one of America's first black mayors. When Hatcher won the Democratic primary, the local Democratic Party threw their support to his Republican opponent. Not to be deterred, Hatcher took out an ad in the New York Times seeking financial support and got help from national civil rights leaders and from Senators Bobby and Ted Kennedy. He won the election by less than 2,000 votes, and he held the job for the next 20 years. Hatcher's election raised hopes for black empowerment in America, but downsizing in the steel industry throughout the 70s and 80s caused big problems for the mayor and his city. As jobs dried up, local businesses shut down, buildings were abandoned, and a third of the residents fled Gary. There were efforts at revitalization. In the 1980s, Gary built a downtown convention hall and a transportation center. Both were designed by local African-American architect Wendell Campbell. The transportation center won 6 design awards. But federal aid to the city dried up during the Reagan administration, leaving Gary with no money for more projects. Under Hatcher's successor, Thomas Barnes, the city continued to struggle. Barnes did succeed in laying the groundwork for the Majestic Star and Trump casinos at Buffington Harbor. They opened in 1996. That same year, this overwhelmingly African-American city elected a white mayor, Scott King, a Chicago-born lawyer who had never held elective office. He was re-elected in 1999 and again in 2003 for his work on affordable housing, public safety, and economic development, but he's probably best known for his efforts to boost Gary's image. For example, Gary hosted the 2001 and 2002 Miss USA pageants, and pro sports have come to town. The Gary Steelheads of the Continental Basketball Association formed in 2001. And in 2003, a new minor league baseball team, the Gary South Shore Railcats of the Northern League, took up residence in the splashy new U.S. Steel Yard. It's a $40 million, 6,000-seat stadium, complete with skyboxes and a big screen TV scoreboard. Motorists can see the stadium and even a little of the ball game as they pass through Gary on the Indiana Toll Road. One of the world's largest Bennigan's restaurants is in the right field corner. Gary sees it as a real vote of confidence from an important national chain. Gary Chicago Airport wants to be the region's third major airport. It has a terminal with 3 gates, a runway longer than any at Midway, and an ambitious FAA-approved expansion plan, but only 4 regularly scheduled commercial flights a week as of February 2004. Chicago-based Boeing Corporation currently uses the airport for its fleet of corporate jets.
Gary, Indiana, Gary, Indiana, Gary, Indiana, that's the town that knew me when.
Gary was the supposed hometown of con man Harold Hill in The Music Man. Turned out he lied about that, but some other famous people really are from Gary. Michael Jackson and his brothers formed the Jackson 5 here in 1966. They won talent contests, and in 1968, they auditioned for Motown owner Berry Gordy. By 1970, they had 4 number 1 hits, including ABC. Other famous Gary natives include film and TV actor Carl Malden, who worked in the mills for 3 years before leaving to seek fame and fortune, football player and broadcaster Alex Karras, and astronaut Frank Borman. He was commander of Apollo 8, the first space mission to leave Earth's gravity and orbit the moon. Later, he was president of Eastern Airlines. The Borman Expressway is named for him. If you're looking for the earliest industry in this area, go a little south and east of Gary to what is today Merrillville and Hobart. The first industrial plants in northern Indiana weren't steel mills, they were grist mills, like this one in Deep River County Park, southeast of Hobart. John Wood built the first one in 1838 and named the area Woodvale. That mill is gone now. His son Nathan built this one in 1876. It was restored in 1976 to give us a taste of flour made the old-fashioned way. John Wood was a temperance man, so he probably wasn't too happy about the Merrillville area's other big industry, distilleries. One is still standing. It's called the Old Mill at 73rd and Madison on a branch of Turkey Creek, built in 1851 by John and Elizabeth Law. It's now a pizzeria. Today, Merrillville's big industry is entertainment. The 3,400-seat Star Plaza Theater presents acts as diverse as the area, everything from big-name R&B and country to retro rock and kids shows. Now, let's start our journey northwest along the lakefront. Our first stop might make you do a double take. It looks like we've been transported to an English working-class village. But this is Marktown in East Chicago, Indiana. It's the unfinished dream of Chicago industrialist Clayton Mark. Mark built a steel mill in East Chicago in 1914. He hired the famous architect Howard Van Doren Shaw to design this company town to house his workers. Shaw had designed homes for Mark and many of his neighbors in the wealthy suburb of Lake Forest on Chicago's North Shore. For Marktown, Shaw drew inspiration from the English Garden City concept of the 19th century. As in Gary's first subdivision, workers lived in multi-unit buildings or freestanding homes of varying sizes depending on the employee's rank. The plan included parks, schools, theaters, and a shopping center modeled on Shaw's innovative Market Square in Lake Forest. Only 4 of Marktown's 23 planned sections were ever built. That's because the mill fell on hard times after World War I, and Clayton Mark sold it to Youngstown Sheet and Tube Company in 1923. All of the nearly 100 original Marktown buildings are still standing, and tours of the town are available. Marktown was placed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1975. Today, this English village is populated almost entirely by Latinos. Many work in nearby industrial plants. The European-scale streets are so narrow that homeowners park their cars on the sidewalks and walk in the streets. That fact earned the town a place in Ripley's Believe It or Not. The old Mark manufacturing plant is now owned by International Steel Group, or ISG. It's the second biggest producer of steel in the United States after U.S. Steel. You don't see many 5-year-olds in a steel mill, but this little girl dedicated the very first blast furnace in East Chicago in 1907. Her name was Madeline Block, and the mill belonged to her father, Philip D. Block. His company, Inland Steel, was Clayton Mark's East Chicago rival. Throughout her life, Madeline Block came back to christen every new blast furnace at Inland Steel, and all were named for her. In 1980, at age 78, she dedicated Madeline No. 7, the largest blast furnace in the Western Hemisphere. Inland built its East Chicago plant on a huge man-made peninsula with a harbor and a canal leading to the Grand Calumet River. Today, the company is called Ispat Inland. The corporation's majority owner is East Indian, and Ispat is the Sanskrit word for steel. In 1997, East Chicago got its first casino boat. Today, it's called Harrah's. You could say that John D. Rockefeller was the first to discover Indiana's Lake Michigan shoreline as a land of opportunity for heavy industry. His Standard Oil Company started building an oil refinery in Whiting, Indiana in 1889. The refinery's main product back then was kerosene for lanterns. Gasoline was considered a waste product. It was routinely discarded. Eventually, the refinery grew to be the largest in the nation. But the refinery's home, Whiting, is Indiana's smallest city at 1.76 square miles, according to the book A Native's Guide to Northwest Indiana. Whiting is named for Herbert Pop Whiting, who was an engineer on the Michigan Southern. Now, every account I've read of the history of this town tells of how Pop Whiting either heroically or recklessly ditched his freight train on a siding here in this uninhabited place in 1869 in order to avoid being overrun by a faster-moving passenger train that was bearing down on him from behind. What none of these accounts explains is how you ditch a train. which has no steering wheel and runs on tracks. But however he did it, he earned himself immortality in the process. Our next stop is Hammond, named for George Hammond, the man who invented the refrigerated rail car. Okay, if you're a Chicago history buff, I know what you're thinking. The famous meatpacker Gustavus Swift is usually given credit for that. But that's only because Swift's cars more frequently made it to their destination without falling off the tracks. George Hammond established a meatpacking plant here in 1869 and realized he could revolutionize the beef industry by shipping dressed beef in rail cars chilled with ice. The problem with Hammond's system was that the big, heavy beef carcasses were hung on hooks inside the car so that they wouldn't come in contact with the ice and discolor. But when the train would round a curve, the carcasses would swing wildly, sometimes rocking the car off the tracks and causing a train wreck. That's according to Doug McGinnis, writing in Beef magazine. Hammond annexed a lakefront community called Roby in 1897 and shut down its illegal gambling casinos. But 100 years later, Hammond warmly welcomed gambling back to town with the Empress Casino boat. It became the Horseshoe Casino in 2000. Humorist Gene Shepard used his childhood in Hammond as inspiration for the classic holiday movie A Christmas Story.
Oh, skunked again.
He was a New York radio raconteur who made a career out of lampooning his Rust Belt hometown, which he called Homan. Shepard obviously knew his Hammond history. The town was originally called Homanville after its founder. There's far more to know about Northwest Indiana than I could possibly tell you in this brief tour. One place to learn more is this Welcome Center in Hammond. The whimsical design by architect Chuck Bone represents the lake, dunes, industry, and farmland. The center offers lots of local information and also has a John Dillinger Museum. America's first public enemy number one figures prominently in Lake County history. Among other things, he escaped from a jail in Crown Point, where he was being held for killing a police officer in an East Chicago bank robbery. This is probably not an attraction you'd expect to find in such a heavily industrialized area, but the new Lost Marsh Golf Course is just one of many industrial sites around here that have been returned to open land and public access. These natural-looking hills are actually old piles of slag, a waste product that steel mills routinely dumped in molten form in low-lying remote areas. Later, slag was dumped in landfills. Now, environmentalists are seeing old fill sites like this one as opportunities. In addition to reclaiming and restoring open lands, environmentalists are preserving remnants of the natural landscape that somehow survived 100 years of industrialization here. Like Wolf Lake, which straddles the Illinois-Indiana border. In the days before modern refrigerators, the Knickerbocker Ice Company harvested ice on Wolf Lake in the winter. Despite its infamy as the place where murderers Nathan Leopold and Richard Loeb dumped the body of their young victim in 1924, and despite its appearance as a stagnant pool ringed by industry, it's actually a haven for wildlife. Chicago's Field Museum proved that when it conducted a bio-blitz here on August 23, 2002.
650 species and still counting!
The goal was to count as many species as possible in a single 24-hour period. An army of scientists and volunteers slogged through the muck, collecting all manner of plant and animal life. They counted nearly 2,000 species, some endangered, and several they didn't know existed here. Their conclusion: remarkable diversity remains. Efforts are now underway to rehabilitate and protect this precious oasis in the middle of an industrial landscape. We've reached the border of Indiana and Illinois. Here on the lakefront, wedged between a power plant and a highway overpass, is a relic from frontier days. Surveyors erected this monument in 1833 to mark the border between Illinois and Indiana. In 1929, Commonwealth Edison put a power plant on the state line. The Renaissance Revival-style architecture turned a potential eyesore into a lakefront landmark. Although the plant is in Indiana, all of its electricity is sold to the city of Chicago. The Illinois-Indiana border here is a modern-day trading post, according to Jim Sulsky, writing in the Chicago Tribune magazine. Hordes of Illinoisans daily cross the border for cheap gas, liquor, cigarettes, fireworks, which are illegal to bring back into Illinois, and Lake Michigan gambling boats. Research shows that 80% of gamblers come here from Illinois, according to Sulsky. And Sulsky points out that on weekends, a horde of Hoosiers crosses into Illinois to buy liquor, which can't be purchased in Indiana on Sundays. As we enter Illinois on the lakefront, we see Chicago's Calumet Park. It's built on landfill, mostly slag, which was dumped into the lake in the days before environmental laws. Just past the park is the mouth of the Calumet River, the entrance to the Port of Chicago. You probably don't think of Chicago as one of America's great port cities, but as of 2002, it was the 26th busiest port in America, surpassing such famous maritime cities as Boston and Seattle, according to the Illinois International Port District's executive director. Here on the Calumet River, tugs and barges mingle with Great Lakes freighters up to 1,000 feet long, and even the occasional overseas ship arriving via the St. Lawrence Seaway. The port handles raw materials for steelmaking, as well as grain, salt, sugar, fertilizer, chemicals, and more. Until the 1870s, Chicago's main port was downtown in the bustling Chicago River. But after the Great Fire of 1871, port activity moved to the Calumet River. The man who developed Calumet Harbor was James Harvey Bowen, president of the Calumet and Chicago Dock and Dredge Company, which deepened and straightened the waterways here and subdivided the land. Soon there were railroads, hotels, and businesses. Ironically, Bowen was killed by the development he helped to create here. He was thrown from his buggy when a steam engine startled his horse. With the opening of the harbor, an old lighthouse built in 1851 was put back into service. It stood out in the lake at the end of a long seawall. Mary Ryan took over as lighthouse keeper when her husband died in 1873. She hated the job. In her diary, she wrote, "This is not a fit place for anyone to live in." Her replacement finally arrived in 1880, according to the book Women Who Kept the Lights. At the mouth of the Calumet River, this now abandoned site was once U.S. Steel's famous Southworks. In its heyday, the plant employed 20,000 workers, including Chicago's first Mexicans. They settled in the surrounding Chicago neighborhood of South Chicago. Our Lady of Guadalupe on 91st Street is the oldest Mexican parish in the Chicago area, and it's the national shrine of St. Jude. The parish had more Vietnam War dead than any parish in the United States. A monument to them was erected in 1970 across the street from the church. The Mexicans who settled here were following in the tradition of earlier immigrant groups who came to South Chicago to work in the mills and established churches as soon as they could. Poles, Slovaks, Irish, Germans, and Scandinavians. African Americans also came for jobs in the mills. They formed a congregation in 1917 that became Pilgrim Baptist Church. They moved into this building at 91st and Burley in 1945. It was used in the Blues Brothers movie. The film was shot at many locations south of Chicago. We'll see more of them later. Chicago's oldest continually operating synagogue is in South Chicago, too. Today it's the home of Beth Shalom B'nai Zaken Ethiopian Hebrew congregation, which is made up almost entirely of African American Jews. The neighborhood of South Chicago was dealt a devastating blow in the 1990s when Southworks closed. The city hopes to turn that loss into the opportunity of a lifetime. The site has been completely cleared, except for these heroic-sized ore walls. At 2,000 feet long and 40 feet high, they were just too costly to demolish. This 573-acre site is now the largest tract of vacant land in Chicago. It's larger than the downtown loop, and it has over 1.5 miles of Lake Michigan shoreline. The city has mapped out a brand new neighborhood to be built here. The nearly half-mile-long slip along the ore walls might become a marina and waterfront entertainment district. The walls themselves might be used to display art or to screen outdoor movies on summer nights. The southern half of the site will be an industrial business park. Solo Cup is the first company to announce plans to build a new plant here. Most exciting of all, the plan returns the lakefront here to public access. There will be a large new lakefront park with spectacular downtown views, and a narrower stretch of lakefront parkland extending south the full length of the site. Now let's follow the Calumet River for the second leg of our journey. We'll travel in true Calumet River style on this tugboat supplied by Holly Marine Towing. Holly Marine stands on the very spot where nearly 200 years ago an enterprising settler named Johann Mann established a ferryboat crossing. The grave of one of the settlers who lived here back in those days can be found today in the middle of a scrapyard along the Calumet River at 92nd Street. He was Andreas von Zerngibbel, who died in 1855. The Calumet shows up on some of the earliest maps of the region, with such spellings as Kennebec with a K and Calamink with a C. Calumet is a Native American word translated as, among other things, peace pipe and deep still water. These towering structures are vertical lift bridges for railroad trains. The span rides up and down between the towers to allow boats to pass underneath. 3 of the 4 bridges built side by side here in 1915 are still standing, although only one is still in use. As impressive as the railroad bridges are, they're dwarfed by the next bridge. It carries the Chicago Skyway over the Calumet River. With more than 12 stories of clearance, it's Chicago's highest and longest bridge. According to urban legend, the Skyway was built by Mayor Richard J. Daley so his family could have a quicker route to their vacation home over in Michigan. But it was actually built to avoid tying up traffic on Southside city streets with a flood of motorists from the newly completed Indiana Toll Road. Travelers avoided the Skyway in droves, preferring the longer but free interstate routes. Tolls were raised to cover revenue shortfalls, and that reduced traffic even more. It turns out the Skyway was just a little ahead of its time. Traffic more than doubled between 1993 and 2003 with the growth of casinos and residential development in northwest Indiana. A 4-year, $250 million renovation started in 2001. South of the Skyway, we pass between the neighborhoods of East Side and South Deering. In the 1920s, the river here was lined with factories making steel and soap, paint and chemicals, even breakfast cereal at the General Mills plant. Virtually all the plants are shut down now, but some of the property is still used for shipping and storing raw materials. Continuing south on the Calumet River, we come to the site of one of the bloodiest incidents in modern labor history. People called it the Memorial Day Massacre of 1937. It happened at Republic Steel, around 116th Street. In late May of that year, about half the plant workers went out on strike in an effort to unionize. Republic Chairman Tom Girdler said he'd go back to hoeing potatoes before he'd agree to have a union in his plant, according to an account by author Howard Fast. On May 30th, after several days of conflict between workers and police guarding the plant, strikers and their supporters and family members tried to demonstrate at the plant gate. A line of police blocked their way. Insults were thrown, then sticks and bottles. The police responded with a volley of gunfire. Ten demonstrators were killed, and many police and protesters were injured. The strike against Republic and other so-called little steel companies was eventually broken. The companies weren't unionized until 1942, after the federal government mandated union elections. At the base of a flagpole, in front of a former Union Hall near the site of the incident, is a monument that memorializes those killed. In 1984, Republic Steel became LTV Steel, which filed for bankruptcy in 2001 and closed the plant. Just ahead is a Chicago neighborhood where manufacturing is still alive and well. For nearly 20 years, this plant in Hegewisch produced the Ford Taurus, America's best-selling car. Like many plants in the area, it produced military vehicles during World War II. In 2004, the plant prepared for the end of an era when the last Taurus would roll off the line and the factory would be re-engineered to make a variety of 21st century vehicles. Hegewisch is also the site of Chicago's only operating sawmill. It's at Calumet Harbor Lumber Company, which is a fourth-generation local business. Hegewisch is named for Adolf Hegewisch, who built a rail car factory here but never achieved the success of his nearby rival, George Pullman. The Chicago Sun-Times' Mike Houlihan wrote that folks in this isolated blue-collar enclave make Mike Ditka look like a ballet dancer. They take special delight in the struggle of outsiders to pronounce their neighborhood's name, Hegewisch. We've now traveled about 8 miles inland on the Calumet River, and we're at Lake Calumet. This lake is sort of the poster child for the rise and fall of industry here. Lake Calumet was once known for its natural beauty and abundant wildlife. Chicago sportsmen established private hunting reserves here, and Frank Lloyd Wright drew up plans in 1898 for a lavish amusement resort on the lake. That was never built. George Pullman used Lake Calumet as the idyllic setting for the company town he built around his famous railcar factory. Today it's a Chicago neighborhood called Pullman. As industry and shipping took over the region, Lake Calumet was reshaped again and again, and its flat prairie shoreline has been replaced by a mountain range of landfills. The last major alteration of this lake was in 1958, when it was deepened and long peninsulas were added to serve as slips for the large foreign freighters that were expected to arrive with the opening of the St. Lawrence Seaway. But the industry switched to containerized shipping, and few large ocean-going ships ever used this port. The newest plan for Lake Calumet and the surrounding region embraces the fact that miraculously, despite all the changes wrought by industry, this is still one of the most important native habitats in Illinois. The city is offering tax incentives for industry to build on thousands of acres of available land here. At the same time, the city's plan and a suburban counterpart will protect thousands of acres of marshes and prairie scattered around the region and will develop new natural areas on abandoned industrial sites along transportation and utility corridors. Even areas set aside for industrial development will be landscaped with native plants. The city has raised $7.6 million to build an environmental center to open in 2006 on Hagwish Marsh, right across the street from the Ford plant. Coming back out of Lake Calumet, we head toward a place where three rivers come together: the Calumet, Little Calumet, and Grand Calumet. To get there, we travel on a mysterious man-made canal that's now a part of the Calumet River. No one is quite sure who first created this channel. One theory is that it was a portage used by Native Americans. After centuries of dragging canoes through here, they wore down the land, and after a flood in 1803, well, it became a canal. However it happened, it reversed the flow of the Grand Calumet River, which formed the lagoon I showed you way back in Gary's Marquette Park. The Thomas J. O'Brien Lock helps preserve the backwards flow. At 1,000 feet long, it's the largest lock on the Illinois waterway system, and it's also the newest. It was built in 1960 when the waterway was deepened to handle bigger barges and ships. Just beyond the lock, in suburban Burnham, the three rivers come together: the Calumet, the Grand Calumet, and the Little Calumet. Locals told me they think this wrecked ship and abandoned barge that block the Grand Calumet were put there intentionally many years ago to keep boaters out of the shallow river. We enter the Little Calumet, which takes us first to Calumet City. The town has a rough and tumble reputation dating back to the time when it was Al Capone's hangout. Cal City's notorious strip of gambling houses, brothels, strip clubs, and all-night bars flourished until a reform-minded mayor bulldozed it in the 1990s. The same mayor was later sentenced to 5 years in jail on federal corruption charges. Another demolition project in Calumet City led to the discovery of the oldest building in the area. This settler's cabin, built around 1830, was found under 2 layers of siding in 1970 when a home was being torn down to build a mini-mall. The cabin was once the home of the Shrum family. They were the first permanent settlers here and owned, among other things, the local pickle works. The Calumet City Historical Society restored it and offers tours by appointment. As we head west from Calumet City, we pass below the Bishop Ford Freeway, part of I-94. Bishop Lewis Henry Ford was the pastor of Chicago's St. Paul Church of God in Christ for nearly 60 years. He was the international leader of the 8.5 million member church from 1990 until his death in 1995. He was also an advisor to President Clinton. Ford was born in Mississippi, and he was an early civil rights leader. He spoke at the funeral of Emmett Till, the Chicago boy whose murder on a trip to Mississippi sparked outrage and a national movement for racial tolerance. Passing through Dolton and Riverdale, we reach Calumet Park, where the river forks again. If we were continuing on the Little Calumet, we'd take a hairpin turn and head back east toward Indiana, but we'd run aground in the shallow water long before we got there. Instead, we'll continue west on the Cal-Sag Channel, yet another man-made waterway. The Cal-Sag Channel runs through a shallow valley that geologists called the Chicago Outlet. The ancient valley drained excess water from Ice Age Lake Michigan as the glaciers melted. The water ran into what is today the Illinois River. This channel was completed in 1922 as part of a system of man-made waterways that divert wastewater away from Lake Michigan. Just ahead in Blue Island, the channel feeds a man-made waterfall. It makes for a nice park, but it wasn't built for looks. It's one of several aeration devices built to breathe life back into the area's overworked waterways. It puts air into the water to encourage fish and plant life. We'll hop off the boat in Blue Island and begin the third leg of our journey. Yes, Blue Island really was an island in prehistoric Lake Michigan, what geologists call Lake Chicago. When the waters receded, the island became a ridge rising 40 feet above the prairie, visible for miles around. Now, why was this island blue? Well, there are several theories about the origin of the name. According to an 1834 account, the ridge, when viewed from a distance, appeared to stand in an azure mist of vapors. Another early account called it an island in a sea of blue irises. Development started with the Blue Island House Hotel in 1836. Norman and Julia Rexford were the proprietors. The American House Hotel arrived in 1844 on a raft. It was shipped down the Calumet River from Indiana, where it had served as a courthouse for 8 years. Blue Island was the brick-making capital of America, or of the world, depending on who was doing the boasting. In truth, many towns south of Chicago made tons of bricks and tons of money from glacial clay beneath the soil. The town nearly went up in flames in the wee hours of May 18, 1896. The Great Blue Island Fire destroyed 3 square blocks of the main business district in just 4 hours. Fortunately, much of the town's historic architecture survived. The local historical society offers a walking tour of well-preserved pre- and post-fire buildings. George W. Mayer, whose work we saw in Gary, designed this home for prominent local banker William Weber in 1898. A young architect in Mayer's firm was a third-generation Blue Islander named Robert Seyfarth. Seyfarth's first design in Blue Island is clearly inspired by Mayer's love of the prairie style. But when he struck out on his own in 1911, Seyfarth started working in a variety of historical styles instead. He designed 8 homes for family and friends in Blue Island between 1903 and 1950, and all are still standing. But he's best known for the homes he built on Chicago's wealthy North Shore. If you're a Chicago architecture buff, this house will truly startle you. Bertrand Goldberg created this international-style design in 1939 for a local doctor, Aaron Heimbach. Goldberg later gave us more sculptural modern buildings like Chicago's Marina Towers. Enough rail lines converge in Blue Island to bring out the little kid in every grown-up. These 5 steel bridges over the Cal-Sag Channel carry nearly 100 freight trains a day and form a picturesque backdrop that's become legendary in the world of train fanatics. But local motorists stuck at railroad crossings feel more frustration than fascination. Trains a mile and a half long are increasingly common, and towns like Blue Island are levying fines to punish railroads that snarl traffic. The most historic road in this historic town is Vincennes. Well, it doesn't look like much today, but this was an Indian trail that followed the Illinois-Indiana border all the way down to Fort Vincennes in southern Indiana, which the French established in 1732. In Chicago's earliest days, Gurdon S. Hubbard established fur trading posts all along the trail and visited them frequently. Indians nicknamed him Swift Walker. The road became known as Hubbard's Trace. It was marked with milestones. We'll see one that still exists later in South Suburban Crete. Hubbard's marriage to a Native American teenager named Wachika helped him in his dealings with the Indians. Watseka, Illinois is named for her. But as Chicago evolved from a frontier trading post to a commercial city, Hubbard divorced Wachika and married a white woman. He went on to become a land speculator, meat packer, freight forwarder, banker, and eventually state legislator. And Vincennes Avenue has another claim to fame. It was part of the Dixie Highway, conceived at the dawn of the automobile age. This part of our tour takes us south along the Dixie Highway through a string of historic suburban towns. But first, let's visit a town just west of Blue Island, Robbins, the first municipality in the northern half of the U.S. incorporated and governed entirely by African Americans. Some blacks settled here in the 1890s. More came around 1910 when a white developer named Henry E. Robbins began selling local property at affordable prices to African Americans and also to interracial couples and mixed-race people who were shunned in both white and black areas. Shortly after Robbins' death, the town's black and interracial residents formed a government and filed papers to incorporate the town. But they didn't have the money to pay the incorporation fee. The late developer's son paid the fee, earning the right to name the town in honor of his father. Among the first settlers were Samuel and Lydia Nichols, whose granddaughter, Robbins native Nichelle Nichols, grew up to play Lieutenant Uhura on Star Trek. Nichelle had been a singer in the Duke Ellington and Lionel Hampton bands. After her first season of Star Trek, she was ready to quit the show. She thought her role was minimized because of discrimination. But Martin Luther King persuaded her to stay with the series because he believed she was a positive role model. She participated in TV's first interracial kiss with William Shatner as Captain Kirk. After her career on Star Trek, she helped NASA recruit the first women and minority astronauts for the Space Shuttle program. This impressive modern mansion belonged to S.B. Fuller, one of the first African-American millionaires. Fuller grew up poor in Louisiana, and he only had a 6th grade education, but he believed he had the power to succeed against any obstacle. His first job was as a door-to-door salesman. Then, in 1935, with a $25 investment, he opened up a cosmetics company. Eventually, he owned or controlled 8 major corporations, including a newspaper chain. Fuller alienated civil rights leaders in 1963 when he made a speech suggesting that African Americans needed to take more initiative in business and education instead of blaming their problems on discrimination. Despite his controversial views, Fuller inspired and even mentored many successful African American entrepreneurs. The town of Robbins helped blacks achieve new heights in another way. A group of black aviators established an airport and flying school here in 1931. The pioneers were Cornelius Coffey and Willa B. Brown, who were later married and who taught many future Tuskegee airmen. Also John Robinson and Janet Harmon Bragg, who later became the first black woman to earn a commercial pilot's license. Just 2 years after the airport opened, the hangar and 3 airplanes were destroyed in a windstorm and the airport closed. In 2003, on what would have been Cornelius Coffey's 100th birthday, this marker was erected to show the spot where the airport once stood. We're back in Blue Island now, and it's time to head south on the Dixie Highway. We'll travel in a 1928 Model A Ford Woody with owner Bob Steinmetz at the wheel. Believe it or not, the highway predates this car by more than 10 years. The Dixie Highway opened in 1915, allowing early motorists to drive from Chicago all the way to Miami Beach. Long-distance driving was an outrageous notion back then, and it took an outrageous person to make it a reality. His name was Carl Fisher. Fisher was born in Greensboro, Indiana in 1874 and was a salesman from the very start. First, he sold newspapers, then bicycles, then cars. He attached one of his cars to a helium balloon and floated over Indianapolis to publicize his dealership. He set a speed record in 1904, driving 2 miles in just over 2 minutes on a track. Yes, that's 60 miles an hour in 1904. He struck it rich by marketing the first practical automobile headlight. He used some of the money to promote automobile racing. People thought it was a crazy idea, but his Indianapolis 500 turned skeptics into believers and made Fisher even richer. Then he got an even crazier idea. He bought a bunch of swampland in sparsely populated South Florida and started building a tropical resort called Miami Beach. He predicted that vacationers of the future would want to travel there by automobile, so he built them a highway. Telephone poles along the route from Chicago to Florida were painted with the red and white DH symbol to guide vacationers and land buyers to Fisher's paradise. He lured them there with bathing beauties. The very first one was his own wife, Jane, whom he had married when he was 35 and she was 15. By 1925, Florida's population had increased by 6 million people, and Carl Fisher was worth $50 million. But his life was falling apart. His marriage ended and he started drinking. A failed Long Island land deal and a hurricane in Florida nearly ruined him. The 1929 stock market crash finished him off financially. Carl Fisher died in 1939, broke, alone, and all but forgotten, in Miami Beach, the town he created. U.S. highways made the Dixie Highway obsolete, but local promoters are keeping its memory alive with new historical markers and an annual vintage car rally called the Dixie Dash. Heading south from Blue Island, we pass between Posen and Dixmoor and come to Harvey, a historic town named for not one, but two Harveys. Harvey L. Hopkins, who founded the town's first industry, Hopkins Mower Works, in 1880, and the more famous Turlington W. Harvey, who created a model industrial town here starting in 1890. This was to be a wholesome temperance town. Turlington's publicity boasted, "Here's the chance for the man who is toiling in hot, dusty city factories, living in crowded rooms without a breath of fresh air, to work in large, roomy buildings and own a home in a purer atmosphere." Within 3 years, the town had more than 5,000 residents. Visitors to the Chicago World's Fair of 1893 made special trips to see this modern marvel. They called it the Magic City. The population grew and industry thrived until the 1960s. Many of the nation's biggest companies had plants here, like engine maker Alice Chalmers. African Americans have a long and important history in Harvey. Schaefer AME Chapel, established in 1896, long before its present building was built, was the first black congregation in the South Suburbs. In 1899, world-famous evangelist Amanda Berry Smith built an orphanage here for black children. Amanda Smith was born a slave in 1837. As an adult, she was twice widowed, and only one of her children survived, but nothing shook her faith. She put on a Quaker-like costume and went on the road to preach temperance and the gospel. Her powerful oration and singing voice drew crowds across America, Europe, India, and Africa, even though many male preachers in her own AME church resisted the idea of a woman minister. In the 1890s, she moved to Chicago intending to retire. Instead, she established the Amanda Smith Industrial Home for Colored Orphan Children, which she located in Harvey because it was a temperance town. Amanda Berry Smith died in 1915. The Chicago Defender called her the greatest woman that this race has ever given the world. She was buried here in Washington Memory Gardens in Homewood in a modest grave. Unfortunately, her orphanage struggled financially after her death, and then it burned to the ground in 1918. A special marker was placed on her grave at a ceremony in 1991. By 1990, Harvey's population was economically depressed and 80% black. Housing experts say Harvey's white population followed the jobs out of town, but blacks weren't as able to move because of long-standing patterns of segregation. First of all, until 1948, homeowners could legally restrict the sale of their property based on race. In fact, it was part of the real estate industry's code of ethics to encourage racial segregation. Blacks were also shut out of post-World War II GI housing because federal loans were for new home construction, virtually all of which was taking place outside of areas where blacks could live. And banks routinely turned down African Americans for home loans. Even after restrictive covenants were ruled illegal, realtors maintained what historian Larry McClellan calls a dual housing market, showing some properties to whites only and others to blacks only. This set up housing patterns in Chicago and its suburbs that have only recently started to change. Dixie Square Shopping Center, shuttered in 1979, it's a monument to hard times in Harvey. In 1980, director John Landis used the abandoned mall for the Blues Brothers movie.
Lots of space in this mall.
He put in new storefronts and shot this classic car chase scene there. The mall remains abandoned today. The legendary R&B group The Dells have been called the pride and joy of Harvey, Illinois. They met at Thornton Township High School in 1953. They're among the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame's 2004 inductees. Painter Ivan Albright was born in Harvey in 1897. His famous grotesque figures might have been inspired by his job making watercolor paintings of wounds for the Army in World War I. Much-loved Chicago Cubs announcer and former infielder Lou Boudreau was also born in Harvey. As a player-manager, the Good Kid led the Cleveland Indians to victory in the 1948 World Series. Dreesen Street is named for Harvey-born comedian Tom Dreesen. He opened for Frank Sinatra for over a decade and headlined in Las Vegas and Atlantic City. Dreesen has appeared on The Tonight Show more than 60 times and was a guest host for David Letterman. Just south of Harvey, the Illinois Central built the largest rail yard in the country in 1920. Markham Yard was named for Illinois Central President Charles Markham. A recent large expansion of the yard has brought much-needed economic development to this area. The town of Markham is home to a natural wonder, too, a cluster of 4 grasslands owned by the Nature Conservancy and Northeastern Illinois University. This one, Gensburg-Markham Prairie, was saved by the stock market crash of 1929. That's one of the things I learned from naturalist Mark Panzer. He said the land was slated for development in the 1920s and bulldozers had even cut roads through here, but the Depression ended the plan and the prairie grew back. It was rediscovered in the 1960s by a university professor visiting family in the area. Careful management has resulted in one of the highest quality grasslands in the Midwest. In fact, it's been declared a National Natural Monument. It wasn't industry that first changed the natural landscape in the south suburbs. It was farming. Here in South Holland, east of Harvey, the farmers were Dutch and deeply religious. God will provide. That was the motto of the widow Antje Parlberg. Her family's ordeal coming to America was a real test of that faith. It started in 1847 when they left Holland in search of religious freedom. But on the voyage to America, things turned tragic for the Parlbergs. Antje's husband and her infant child both died on the 62-day crossing. The ship's captain offered to return the grieving family to Holland at no charge, but Antje refused. God will provide, she said. And they set off for Holland, Michigan, via the Erie Canal and the Great Lakes. But a fierce storm on Lake Michigan blew their ship all the way to Chicago. There, they met some other Dutch immigrants who led them out here to South Holland. Antje bought some land, she and the kids built a log cabin, and they started farming. The widow had been swindled. The land was only worth a fraction of what she paid for it. She and her family struggled financially. They even had to split up for a time and live among neighbors. But Antje had found the religious freedom she dreamed of. In 1848, the community brought a pastor from Holland, and Antje helped found the first church. It still exists today as the first Reformed church of South Holland. Some services were conducted in Dutch here as late as the 1940s. Author Edna Ferber immortalized Widow Parlberg in her 1924 Pulitzer Prize-winning novel, So Big. You can experience South Holland's pioneer lifestyle firsthand here at this homestead. It was built by Antje's son Peter in 1870. The South Holland Historical Society restored it, along with the home of Peter's in-laws, the Van Oostenbrugges. A century after Widow Parlberg's ordeal, A humble onion plant turned South Holland's Dutch truck gardeners into wealthy farmers. It's called the onion set, a kind of little onion bulb that's sold to farmers and gardeners who use it to produce bigger onions and green onions. South Holland was the onion set capital of the world. At its height, just after World War II, it produced 1.5 billion pounds of onion sets annually. Up until World War II, they were all harvested by hand. During the war, German POWs were used to help plant and harvest the onion sets. Many Dutch settlers were fervent abolitionists. Some of their homes became stops on the Underground Railroad. One of them was Jan Tun. The Dutch were known for having large families, but the size of Jan Tun's family was beyond belief. According to one account, he and his wife Agatha had 23 children. By the time he died in the 1890s, his extended family numbered in the hundreds. They actually incorporated and elected officers. The post-World War II housing crisis changed South Holland from a farming community into a bedroom community. Today, the Dutch are no longer the majority here. South Holland is a little more than 50% African American. Leaders here value diversity, and they're trying to maintain it, but it takes work. Later on, I'll show you some inspiring programs designed to foster stable, integrated communities all over the South Suburbs. Another suburb east of the Dixie Highway is Thornton. Now, Thornton is best known for a hole in the ground, a very, very big hole in the ground. This is Thornton Quarry, one of the largest limestone quarries in the world, according to its owner, Material Service Corporation. Stone is blasted loose daily. Then it's loaded onto trucks with 100-ton capacity and taken to a crusher that grinds up solid rock like hard candy. The crusher processes 2,600 tons per hour. Just about any concrete road, sidewalk, or building you encounter in the Chicago area is made from Thornton limestone. The quarry is about as deep as a 40-story building is tall. This is the deepest part of the quarry, 400 feet down. That's actually groundwater cascading down the walls. It collects in what's called the sump, where the water is recirculated and used for processing the stone. The quarry is 1.5 miles square and occupies 2/3 of the town of Thornton. Streets there are cleaned daily to minimize the dust. The quarry also installed an expensive system to wash dust off truck wheels before they leave the yard. The limestone in this quarry was once part of a coral reef at the bottom of a warm, shallow ocean that covered this entire area millions of years ago. Pick up a rock here and you'll find 400-million-year-old fossils. At the current rate of production, it'll be another 50 years before Thornton Quarry is exhausted, which is pretty amazing when you consider that quarrying first started here in the 1850s. When early quarry workers got thirsty, they might have wet their whistles with beer brewed nearby on the banks of Thorn Creek. A German immigrant named John S. Bielfeldt built this brewery in 1876. Beer was brewed here during Prohibition, possibly under mob control. Federal agents raided the brewery, smashed the vats, and poured thousands of barrels of illegal brew into Thorn Creek. Today, it's a restaurant named for a former owner whose husband was supposedly bumped off by Al Capone. The story is fictitious, but fans of the paranormal swear the place is haunted by victims of the mob. Just south of Thornton Quarry in Glenwood is a haven for at-risk kids founded more than 100 years ago by a former Humane Society agent named Oscar Dudley. In the 1880s, Dudley went looking for stray animals on Chicago's streets, but he came to feel that Chicago had more homeless and neglected kids. So he founded what became the Glenwood School for Boys in 1887, with help from Abraham Lincoln's son, Robert Todd Lincoln. After 116 years as a boys' school, Glenwood started admitting girls in 2003. The school helps low-income, mostly single-parent families in difficult circumstances. Glenwood is also home to a historically African-American cemetery, Mount Glenwood Memory Garden, established in 1902. African Americans suffered racism even in death. They couldn't be buried in many cemeteries in Chicago, so special funeral trains brought the deceased and the mourners to far-flung cemeteries like this one. This is the grave of Fred Duke Slater, an All-American Iowa football star who was probably the only person to have simultaneous careers as a pro football player and lawyer. He practiced law during his last 4 pro seasons with the Chicago Cardinals from 1927 to 1931, and later became a Chicago judge. This is the grave of an all but forgotten African-American sports hero, Major Taylor. In 1899, he was the fastest bicycle racer in the world. He once said, "Life's too short for a man to hold bitterness in his heart," but he had every reason to be bitter. Taylor started racing as a teenager with coaching from an Indianapolis bike shop owner who had hired him to perform bicycle stunts in front of his store. Soon people were calling him the Colored Cyclone. But white racers got Taylor banned from racing in his own hometown and in the South. One white competitor pulled him from his bicycle and choked him unconscious. After winning a world championship in Montreal in 1899, Taylor was finally allowed to compete in his own country's nationals and won in 1900. His racing career made him one of the country's wealthiest African Americans. But after he retired at age 32, his life slowly fell apart. He died at age 52 in the charity ward of Crook County Hospital and was buried here in a pauper's grave. Nearly 20 years after his death, a group of bike racers with money from Schwinn Bicycle Company had Taylor's body moved to a new gravesite here and installed a plaque honoring him. Now let's head back to the Dixie Highway. It's just west of here in Homewood. As you can see, this is a town that really takes its Dixie Highway history seriously. But half a century before the highway was built, it was a railroad that got Homewood started. This is one of many towns that grew up along the legendary Illinois Central. It came through in 1853. Its mission was to settle the prairie, so it bypassed any existing settlement of more than 100 people. The hope was that new towns would form along the train line. The plan worked. Between 1850 and 1860, Illinois' population more than doubled. The line ran the full length of the state, from Chicago to Cairo. There, passengers could board an Illinois Central steamboat on the Mississippi bound for New Orleans. Samuel Clemens, also known as Mark Twain, piloted some of them between 1859 and 1861. Eventually, the railroad was extended all the way to New Orleans. It was called the Main Line of Mid-America. Abraham Lincoln was the Illinois Central's lawyer from 1851 to 1861. Later, the IC took Lincoln's body on its final journey home. The Illinois Central carried almost a third of Union troops and supplies during the Civil War. Later, it brought waves of African Americans north in what came to be known as the Great Migration. The Illinois Central's City of New Orleans was one of the most famous trains in the glory days of intercity train travel.
Riding on the City of New Orleans, Illinois Central Monday morning rail.
This song by Chicago favorite Steve Goodman mourns the end of that era. Today, Metro Electric commuter trains and Amtrak provide passenger service on the old Illinois Central tracks. Some early Homewood residents understood that the railroad had the potential to turn this small farm town into a residential community. A local entrepreneur named Henry Gottschalk tried his hand at home building. His family had made its money from from a hay press that served local farmers and a brickyard that made clay tile to drain farm fields. But Henry used the bricks from his family's brickyard to build 6 houses. The bricks were proudly stamped with the name of the town. 4 of Henry Gottschalk's 6 houses are still standing. 2 of them have been designated local landmarks. This one, the Doorband Howe House, was saved from demolition and restored by the Homewood Historical Society. The other one was Henry Gottschalk's own home. Tragically, Henry Gottschalk's wife, sister, and 2-year-old daughter were struck and killed by a train in 1891. Ironically, another local German immigrant, August Steiner, is said to have invented railroad crossing gates. Steiner was a well-known tinkerer. He built this fire engine in 1871. It was the town's first. It still works, and the fire department occasionally brings it out for parades and special events. Steiner also patented a corn husking machine and owned the local flour mill. Another inventor from Homewood, John Miller, has been called the Thomas Edison of roller coasters. He invented special wheels that keep roller coaster cars on the track and allow for far higher and steeper drops and turns. And you know that clanking sound you hear as the roller coaster climbs that first steep hill? Well, that's another Miller invention called the safety ratchet. It prevents the cars from rolling backwards. People often are surprised by the number of golf courses in the south suburbs. It's an area more associated with factories than fairways. But in the late 1800s, as the Scottish sport was becoming popular in America, city dwellers found plenty of open land in the south suburbs to build courses, and the Illinois Central made this area easily accessible. One of the first clubs was built on Homewood farmland. Ravenslow Country Club was built in 1901 by members of Chicago's elite Jewish Standard Club. It's named for the Dutch farmer whose land they intended to buy to build the club. Well, actually his name was Ravensloot, but club members thought Ravenslow sounded better. Now it turned out Ravensloot's land was prone to flooding, so they ended up building the club on a different piece of property, but they liked the name and kept it. Early members included some of the biggest names in the garment industry, Hart, Schaffner and Marx, Spiegel and Florsheim, as well as Sears president Julius Rosenwald. The huge Spanish Revival clubhouse was built in 1916. Next door to the club, the Illinois Central built this impressive station in a similar style. Chicago Magazine ranked Homewood #1 in its class in a 2003 survey of suburbs. The village got especially high marks for health and safety, parks, libraries, and especially schools. Homewood is another suburb where racial integration seems to be working. Housing experts cite the highly rated Homewood Flossmoor High School as a reason why people of all races want to live here and in neighboring Flossmoor. Flossmoor started out as a German farm town. So where did the Scottish name come from? You guessed it, golf. A couple of Hyde Park executives opened the first country club in the area here in 1899. Originally, it was called Homewood Country Club, but later it and the town were given the Scottish name of Flossmoor. Yes! Many streets were also given Scottish names. Others were named for golf and golfers. The Illinois Central put a station at the golf course. This not only helped the golfers, it helped the railroad's struggling real estate venture here. The Illinois Central bought 160 acres of land here in the 1890s, but all they really wanted was the dirt. They planned to use it as fill at the World's Columbian Exposition site in Chicago. The dirt proved unsuitable for fill, so they ran the train line out here, subdivided the land, built 6 houses, and put them up for sale, but nobody bought. Residential development didn't take off here until the golf courses were built. The old train station, built in 1906, was restored in 1996 and turned into a brew pub. There's a surprise around many corners in Flossmoor. The village has assembled an impressive collection of public art. Several of the works are displayed in a landscaped sculpture park. The rest are scattered throughout the quaint downtown. The eyes of the golf world were on the south suburbs in June of 2003 when the U.S. Open was held at Olympia Fields Country Club. The tournament was last held there in 1928. This was once the biggest country club in the nation. It had 4 courses covering 674 acres on land formerly occupied by 20 farms. Butterfield Creek cuts a beautiful winding path through the course, beautiful that is, until your ball lands in it. The mammoth English Tudor clubhouse was built in 1928 at a cost of $1.3 million. Many champions have played here over the years: Bobby Jones, Sam Snead, Ben Hogan, Arnold Palmer, and Jack Nicklaus. And of course, Tiger Woods, who did not win at Olympia Fields in 2003. The championship went to Jim Furyk, his first major. Legendary U of C football coach Amos Alonzo Stagg was the club's first president. He suggested the name Olympia to honor ancient Greek athletic glory, and the streets in this town were given Greek names. Olympia Fields had a little trouble coming up with the minimum 150 voters needed to incorporate in 1927. They solved the problem by registering Illinois Central workers who were housed in work trains along the tracks, and by signing up vacationers who were camped out in tent colonies around the golf course greens. Today, Olympia Fields is a prosperous community. Slightly more than half the population is African American, including the mayor. Returning to the Dixie Highway, we continue south and pass the spectacular Art Deco-style Bloom High School in Chicago Heights. It was the first Illinois high school to be put on the National Register of Historic Places. It was built between 1931 and 1934 and features limestone sculptures and frescoes from 1935. In Chicago Heights, you'll find the Crossroads of the Nation. It earned that nickname because this is where Carl Fisher's North-South Dixie Highway intersects America's very first coast-to-coast highway, the Lincoln Highway, which Carl Fisher and others developed even earlier. The RK Fountain, built in 1916, marks the historic crossroads. It was erected here by the RK Club of Chicago, a women's club devoted to encouraging American art. The earnest dedication ceremony included numerous speeches by club members and local dignitaries, peppered with verses from Emerson and quotes from Abraham Lincoln. The local newspaper gushed that the fountain, quote, benefited humanity now and evermore, its bubbling cups giving freely of the water of life to all who may come and drink. It became a well-used resting place for road-weary travelers. Carl Fisher proposed America's first transcontinental highway in 1912 as a gravel road called the Coast to Coast Rock Highway. Certainly the need was apparent. City streets were fine for automobiles, but the rutted dirt roads in the countryside made car travel between cities virtually impossible, especially after a good rain. Financing came from some car and tire manufacturers and from the public. Individual citizens could become members for $5. Packard Automobile Company President Henry Joy suggested that naming the highway for Abraham Lincoln would make contributions seem positively patriotic. President Wilson became member number 1. A winding route from New York City to San Francisco was mapped through 13 states, and the highway opened in 1913. Early travelers camped in fields or rented rooms from farmers. Soon, whole new roadside industries sprang up: service stations, cabins, diners, and souvenir shops. Henry Joy proposed the next big innovation: concrete pavement. To entice the public to pay the costs, the Lincoln Highway Association paved 1 mile in every state. These so-called seedling miles gave the public a taste of traveling in real comfort. In 1919, the U.S. government tested the military value of highways by sending a convoy across the country along the Lincoln Highway. One of the officers on that mission was a young Lieutenant Colonel Dwight Eisenhower. 37 years later, as president in 1956, Eisenhower signed the Interstate Highway Act. The unromantic U.S. highway numbering system, instituted in 1925, put an end to the Lincoln Highway as an official designation. In 1928, to preserve the Lincoln Highway's memory, the Boy Scouts erected concrete markers at 1-mile intervals for the entire length of the old highway. You can still see one of those markers west of here in New Lenox at Lincoln Way High School. One of the school's teachers and his students transplanted it there from Joliet, where it was dangerously close to the road. Chicago Heights was established about a decade before the Lincoln and Dixie highways came through. It was another planned industrial town like Harvey and Gary. Inland steel was the first industry to move here in 1893. One of the earliest subdivisions of the industrial town has been designated the Euclid Avenue Historic District. It stands on the site of an earlier German farming community called Blum, named either for German political martyr Robert Blum or because of the beauty of nearby woods in spring, according to historian Kenneth Schoon. The decline of industry really hurt Chicago Heights' prosperity, and later its reputation suffered. Several public officials, including a former mayor, were jailed for taking bribes while in office, and African American residents filed 2 lawsuits accusing the city of discrimination. But recent city administrations have moved aggressively to make improvements. The current administration has vowed to serve all citizens and all neighborhoods, to balance the books, improve safety, and attract new businesses. A little east of Chicago Heights is Lansing Airport, one of the first airports in the country. These planes were visiting on a fall day in 2003 as part of a 4,000-mile, 26-city national air tour. It was inspired by the Ford Motor Company's air tours of the 1920s and 30s. They were designed to promote the reliability of air travel to a skeptical public. Lansing was a fitting stop on the tour. After all, Henry Ford built this airport in 1924 to ship auto parts to his plants in this area. His Ford Air Transport Service was the first regularly scheduled airline. Later, the airline was the first to institute commercial airmail. The Lansing Airport's landmark hangar was designed for Henry Ford by Albert Kahn. Kahn was a pioneer of modern industrial architecture. He designed plants for Ford, Chrysler, Packard, and even the Soviet auto industry. This hangar was the first to include a waiting area for passengers. In addition to its historic importance, the airport is a key to the region's economic future with an ambitious expansion plan. Recently, the airport built 3 new hangars and a new $11 million runway. A local Vietnam veteran conceived of this memorial to honor fallen soldiers from Lansing, dating back to the Civil War. He's Tom Liberta, and that's a real Vietnam-era Huey helicopter. When the monument is complete, the hilltop scene will include several life-sized figures depicting a rescue from a battle zone. Continuing south from Chicago Heights, we reach another crossroads of America, centuries older than the Lincoln and Dixie highways. Today it looks like 100 other suburban intersections with gas stations and chain stores, but this was once called Brown's Corners, built at the crossroads of 2 great Indian trails. The north-south trail was the one that we've been following for a while now, the Dixie Highway. You'll remember originally it was called the Vincennes Trace and later on Hubbard's Trail. Well, right here it intersected the east-west Sauk Trail, which went from Detroit all the way to Rock Island, which in the early days was called Saukenuk. In 1833, Adam and Phoebe Brown from Ohio built a farm and an inn right here at this intersection and became the first permanent residents in the area. That's why some people consider South Chicago Heights to be the oldest settlement in the south suburbs. The Sauk Trail was a natural route for the Underground Railroad. Escaped slaves came from the Illinois River Valley to Joliet, then traveled east along the Sauk Trail to Indiana, Michigan, and Canada. This stone marks one of the stops on the Underground Railroad. It's in Sauk Trail Woods, west of South Chicago Heights. It was the McCoy family homestead. Another family of Sauk Trail settlers, the Batchelders, also sheltered escaped slaves. South of South Chicago Heights is Stager, where the big industry was not steel or rail cars or sand and gravel. It was pianos. John Valentine Stager, who emigrated from Germany as a teenager, built the world's largest piano factory here in 1891. When the town wanted to incorporate in 1896, Stager offered to pay the $400 fee if they would name the town for him. After incorporation, he was elected mayor. At its height, the factory made 100 pianos a day, using wood from a Wisconsin forest owned by Stager. By 1926, radios had become far more popular than pianos for home entertainment. The company went bankrupt, and the factory was used to make cabinets for the radios that had put it out of business. South of Stager, in Crete, is a Vincennes Trail marker from 1820, back in the days when Gurdon S. Hubbard was operating trading posts here. Thursday nights during the summer are called cruise nights in Crete. Collectors and fans come to remember the Dixie Highway's heyday and pass on its lore to younger generations. You might wonder how this small Midwestern town came to be named for a Greek island. Settler Willard Wood is said to have chosen the name in 1838 by opening the Bible to a random page. Crete played an important role in the abolitionist movement. There were 3 Underground Railroad stations here. We say goodbye to the Dixie Highway here and circle back to the north and west toward our final destination, Park Forest. On the way, we encounter a really big attraction in the south suburbs, the Nathan Manilow Sculpture Park on the campus of Governor State University in University Park. The 300-acre park contains 22 monumental sculptures. Field Rotation, an environmental sculpture by Mary Miss, covers 3.7 acres. Governor State University has long been at the forefront of fair housing and racial diversity efforts in the south suburbs. Most of its students are adults. In fact, the average age is 33. Typically, they're returning to seek bachelor's or graduate degrees after working and starting families. The quintessential place to start a family in the era after World War II is the next and last stop on our tour.
A young Chicago family drives down to Park Forest, Illinois, for a look at a community that's as orderly and well-planned as their own big city is sprawling and confused.
Park Forest was built here from scratch, starting in 1946. It was America's first fully planned community, built by private enterprise for returning World War II veterans, according to the Park Forest Historical Society's Jerry Schnee. The developers hoped to make a profit, of course, but they also had some idealistic notions about how to solve the severe housing shortage at the start of the baby boom. Developer Philip Klutznick was Commissioner of Federal Public Housing in the Truman administration. He said, "We aren't interested in houses alone. We are trying to create a better life for our people. We will have failed if all we do is produce houses." Klutznick said he believed in living over the store. He moved into this unit with his wife and 5 kids in 1948 when Park Forest was brand new. The family stayed in Park Forest until 1961. Klutznick later lived above the store on North Michigan Avenue after he developed the swanky Water Tower place. Klutznick and his collaborators, businessman Carol F. Sweet, developer Nathan Manilow, and architect Gerald Lobel, designed a revolutionary community according to the most modern ideas about town planning. Klutznick said the completion of this town will mark one of the farthest-reaching actions of private enterprise to replace the usual crowded second-rate urban existence with the American way of life. First came the apartment buildings with 3,000 rental units like this one, which has been restored and is being operated as a house museum by the Park Forest Historical Society. The townhomes were built in clusters. Each had a parking area at the center and a communal tot lot visible from every home. The development was full of child-friendly features like that. Next came 5,700 single-family homes built on superblocks or park blocks, which were formed by winding streets containing open space and landscaping. It was the state-of-the-art in 50s-era town planning. There was a large regional shopping center called the Plaza. Its clock tower became a local landmark. Author William White wrote about Park Forest in the landmark book The Organization Man. In his view, the planners were trying to create a classless society that valued conformity above all else. He called it inconspicuous consumption, and he saw something ominous in this idealistic vision. White described these junior executives and their families as transients on a journey up the new ladder of post-war corporate America. White argued residents were becoming so conditioned by their community and their corporate employers that they risked losing their individuality and leadership ability, remaining, in his words, perpetual children. But many Park Foresters bristle at that characterization even 50 years later. They point out that these young veterans and their wives built all the institutions of municipal government and social society and ran the town themselves while working full-time jobs and raising families. Maybe the most interesting thing about Park Forest is that for all its emphasis on conformity and fitting in, it officially supported open housing and integration from the very beginning. But that policy wasn't tested until 1960, when an African-American university professor named Charles Z. Wilson moved into this house with his wife and 3 kids. Village President Robert Dinerstein made a promise to protect all citizens equally. Dinerstein and other leaders met with neighbors to calm their fears. Property values won't go down, they said, if panic selling does not occur. Wilson and the handful of other African Americans who moved to Park Forest in the 1960s endured some verbal harassment, but on the whole they said their experience was positive and uneventful. Today, Park Forest's population is about 40% minority, 35% African American, according to census figures. And it's widely viewed as the best example of a stable, integrated suburb in the whole Chicago area. South suburban leaders are working hard to encourage this kind of success all over the region. The Unity Coalition, formed in the 1990s, holds an annual event called Hands Across the Southland, as sort of an affirmation of their faith in diversity. And each year, dozens of residents host diversity dinners, welcoming each other into their homes. Park Forest's Human Relations Director Barbara Moore says the town is debunking myths and fears about racial integration with good schools, low crime rates, and cultural attractions like a professional orchestra and theater and a visual arts center. The iconic post-war era shopping center has been replaced with a more traditional downtown area with new streets and small storefronts. Larry McClellan, who is white and who has lived and worked in nearby University Park for 30 years, told me that the greatest gift he gave his children was to raise them in an integrated community. That's why people like Larry wouldn't live anywhere else. Of all the big dreams and grand ideas we've seen on this journey through the region south of Chicago, perhaps this humble notion of living together in harmony is really the biggest dream of all.